Hey everyone, welcome back to Bagel TCG. It's time for everyone's favorite video, tier list videos. Today is going to be a predictive tier list for the Part the Misfail format, MST. We're going to be doing it for Classic Constructed, which is the premier format for Flesh and Blood and what I usually make tier lists for. We're at maybe, I think, the most heroes we've ever had in Flesh and Blood. We have quite a lot right now. You can see how many we have to go through. So it's going to take a little while, a little longer than normal. I think when I first started the channel, there was probably about half this, like half as many heroes here. So really increasing how long it takes, but we have them all alphabeticized here. I think I'll just go down the line and we'll talk about them as we go. Of course, the three big changes in the meta. The first one is before Part the Misfail. Dromai hit Living Legend. She was a really powerful illusionist, really shaped the metagame around her for a long time with how many poppers you had to run. And she is gone now, so that was a big change. And then MST dropped, and we got three new heroes. We got Enigma, the Mystic Illusionist. We got Nu, the Mystic Assassin, and we got Zen, the Mystic Ninja. And those three heroes all seem quite strong. We'll talk about their impact on the format. There are some expansion cards that will also have an impact on the format, but I don't think they will have a huge impact. At least initially, I don't see any big changes in the generic or expansion slot. So those are kind of, mostly the heroes and Dromai hitting Living Legend are going to be the major changes. So let's get into it. We will start with Arachne. Like I said, we're going to do it alphabetical. So let's get it looking good, and we'll just start with Arachne here. Arachne is not S tier. So Assassin got new tools. There are new Assassin cards in this set because there's an Assassin, but a lot of those are based around Nu's toolkit, meaning it's a lot of stuff that cares about one power, and a lot of stealth mechanics, and basically no support for contract. It's not like when Outsiders released and there was just good generic assassin cards like Codex of Frailty. There really isn't a lot of assassin cards specifically for Arachne in this set. So I think he's probably the weakest of the three assassins because of that. He cares about stealth the least. And yeah, I mean, he cares specifically about contract with his hero ability, while Uzuri and Nu both care about stealth on their hero ability, which is what were the primary assassin cards printed in the set. So for that reason, I think he's probably D tier. To explain the tiers a little bit, I guess, S tier are kind of the foundations of the format. It's what you think of when you're building a deck, what you are expecting to see the most of at an event. It doesn't always mean they are the by far the strongest deck, but they're either going to be really strong, and I think maybe they're a sleeper, or they're just highly representative because they're known to be powerful. A tier is other good picks. These aren't like the cornerstones or the pillars of the format, but they're things you expect to play against, and they're powerful things that could win an event. B is kind of the underdogs. These are not what you really expect to play too much at an event. You might see one or two when you go to an event, but they're not that common. They have maybe a few weaknesses that they need to have extra support for. C is kind of the bad decks. These decks usually you wouldn't bring to an event unless you're really a specialist on them. And then D is just like the dumpster fire of decks. I don't think Arachne is actually in dumpster fire territory. I don't know if anyone is exactly in dumpster fire territory right now, which is a good thing. But I think he's in C to D tier. He's definitely quite bad compared to a lot of their stuff. We'll give him the dumpster fire treatment just to really disrespect him. On the opposite end, I think Azalea is S tier. She is maybe the best aggro deck in the format right now. She's definitely one of the most consistent and disruptive aggro decks, and she just does some really insanely powerful things. With there being very little resource disruption in the format right now, there's not any ice heroes. She really can go full red line. Brody Spurlock kind of popularized the 3 blue list that runs all reds and yellows and then just 3 blues for knock. And it's super aggro. It's just basically going 0, 0, 0, present an arrow for 15 or so like every turn. Death Dealer is pretty strong weapon, especially in combination with Tunic. The deck just does really, really powerful things. And I think if you're going to play an aggressive strategy, it should be like in your top 3 picks for an aggro deck, and it might be the strongest aggro deck in the format. It picked up a lot of Living Legend points in the last season, and I wouldn't be surprised if a Living Legend this year, but maybe next year is when it will. But I don't think Azalea will be around forever because it just does such a fundamentally powerful thing. And she can just go so redline in what she's doing. And of course, other Rangers can do that. You could put all the same cards into Riptide, but I think the big difference is that Azalea lets you really have a lot of closing and disruptive power with Dominate, and she doesn't even need to do it every turn. Just getting Dominate on a 15 damage 2 or 3 times in a game is going to be enough. So, yeah, I think she's a really, really good pick right now. And if you want to play an aggressive deck, I think she's what you should look at. If you miss Runeblade, if you miss resolving a lot of attack actions mixed with non-attack actions, she's kind of the current Runeblade. Like, I played a lot of Briar, and she's probably the closest thing we have to Briar right now. Next, we have Betsy. Betsy is another D tier deck. She didn't get her log. I was really hoping she would get her log of this set. She doesn't really have a signature weapon. She doesn't really have anything going for her at all. She doesn't block amazing. She just blocks average. She doesn't really disrupt better than anyone else. She doesn't really provide pressure. I don't actually know what Betsy does that is better than any other deck. I'm pretty sure you could name anything she does, and it would be done better by a different deck. So there's almost no reason to play Betsy unless you just think she's funny, which of course you can go for that. There are fatigue decks kind of going around with Betsy, but I think that might just be better as Bravo. And I also don't think the fatigue decks are very good right now unless you go into like kind of a newer player or underprepared field. But I think in high level events with good players, the fatigue decks are not a good pick. Next up, we have Bolton. Bolton's in an interesting spot. I'm just going to plop him here in A for a second. But he's an interesting spot because he has a Armory deck coming out relatively soon. I actually don't know the exact release date, but I think it's in the next few months, which does seem like it will give him a decent buff. And I do think he was already in an okay spot. He has pretty decent matchups into some of the more aggressive decks because of the life gain he's able to get and how poorly they block him. He's able to beat a lot because of his switching game plan. If you want to switch off Raiden into your OTK plan, it's not bad, and you can do that instead. But he does always have kind of the fundamental charge problem, which I think is much more minimal now than it has ever been before. They've printed continuous support that makes charge less and less of a downside and more of an upside. So I don't think, Bolton is as much of a meme deck as he used to be. He used to just get clowned on 24/7. I think he's quite good, but I don't think he is something I'm going to really expect to play in an event, which is more like A tier. And I don't think he's certainly a pillar of the format. I think he's more just a deck that will show up. A few people will do well on it, especially I know some specialists that do really well on it, but I don't think he is, doing anything particularly more broken than any other deck. Whereas, for example, Azalea just is kind of something fundamentally broken where she can just present like 15 dominate like 3 turns in a row if she rolls pretty good, and there's not much you can do about it. Next up, we've got Bravo. I think the Guardians are all kind of ass right now in a polite way. I'm a big Guardian player, but they haven't really printed anything that makes Guardian do something stronger than the other decks. They have a good matchup into Azalea, which is nice, but into the other aggro decks, they don't actually have that amazing of a matchup. And there's so many good setup decks right now, which have always been Guardian's weakness. They do a really poor job at dealing with board state, and I think that they just made so many good board state decks. So I don't really think there's any reason to play Guardian at the moment, other than if you enjoy it. I think Victor, that we'll get to near the end, is probably the best Guardian, or certainly the best Guardian. but even him I'm not super high on. It is sad, of course, because Bravo is my favorite deck. I brought him to every single Worlds and Pro Tour I've been, but I wouldn't bring him to the next one. I think he's in. I think Guardian's in the worst spot it's been since I started playing during Monarch. Um, and yeah, they kind of do everything bad right now, right? Like your high roll is like present crippling crush dominate, which is like, okay, you used 4 cards to come in for 11 dominate. Azalea can just present 17 or 18 dominate off the same number of cards, and it doesn't have to crush, it just has to hit for 1 to get all of its disruption, and then she can do that every single turn after. Yeah, I just don't really think there's a great reason to play Guardian right now. It's not really going to beat almost any of the decks up here in S tier or A tier. Azalea is maybe one of the only decks it does beat. Next up, we have Dash and Dash IO. We'll start with Dash. I think Dash is A tier. She is one of the better aggro decks if you're playing the boost plan. It's always been pretty fundamentally good numbers. You get max velocity. You kind of start with 6 extra damage if you have Teklo Pounder. And the main advantage over other aggro decks like Azalea is, of course, you can pivot into the pistol plan, which then will make it so you can beat Guardian and the other disruptive decks. So you're not really weak to everything. She's always been kind of the 50-50 deck where she can have a chance into every single option. But I think she is also pretty decent into some of the newer decks that got printed. And I think she's good into a lot of the S tier decks as well. I don't think Azalea is one of those, but you'll see as we add more on, I think she has pretty good matchup spread right now. And so I think she's a good pick. Similarly, I think Dash IO is a really good pick, but I'm putting her down in B tier because I think she is a bit high rolly and not as consistent as I would like, and maybe a little more skill expressive than I'd like, meaning you really have to put a lot of thinking into every turn cycle. She has so many different lines. Being able to play off the top is instant, and knowing when to slow down and set up items and when to put your foot on the gas. She's really, really a weird deck, and I think takes some of the most reps in the game right now compared to any other hero. So I think she can do some really powerful things, but I just don't think she's quite what I would take to an event because of how consistently you have to play. We have seen people take her to like Battle Harden and I think maybe even calling top 8s recently. So she's proven she can do some really powerful things, and I think she does break the game a little with her hero ability, right? You kind of get a potentially permanent 5th card. So you just have like Intellect 5, which is really insane. But yeah, there's a lot to do here, and she is a little weak to disruption, which I think is her biggest downside, right? Is she blocks okay, but not great because items can sometimes make it so you don't block really well. Next up is Dorinthia. I'm going to put Dorinthia in S tier. I think she's probably the best warrior right now. Hatchets is just a really consistent deck, and I even think Dawnblade is quite good. People are going to think of both when they think of Dorinthia. I think both are solid, and I'm just kind of talking about the heroes in general, not a specific deck. Otherwise, I'd have to break down every hero multiple times because a lot of heroes have multiple archetypes. But Dorinthia is quite good in both Hatchets and Dawnblade, and even is okay with Decimator. Although, like I said, I don't think Fatigue is in a great spot right now. But both of her primary game plans are quite good. Hatchets is probably the best mid-range deck in the format if you're looking for a mid-range deck. It blocks pretty phenomenally. You get Tunic with Shunt if you're on that. You get a ton of armor. You get all your D-reacts, and they don't really hurt the rest of your game plan because you only need a few cards to do your consistent like 9 value by getting, Hatchet, Blade Runner, Hatchet, Dynamo. So she's probably one of the highest value decks in the format. I think if you just want another kind of 50-50 deck, she's kind of a better Dash. I mean, that's weird because she's very different than Dash. But what I mean is that she has a pretty good spread into almost the whole field. You're not incredibly favored into anything, but you're not incredibly unfavored into most decks. So if you want to have kind of a chance into everything, Dash has always been a good pick, but I think Dorinthia, specifically Hatchets, is a good pick right now as well, and probably what I would recommend if someone said, "Give me a mid-range deck to play right now," I would probably put them on Hatchet Story. We did see it perform really well at the Pro Tour, and obviously we've had quite a few changes since then. But the deck didn't really lose anything. The format just changed, and I don't think it changed enough to make this deck bad. Next, we have our first Mysteria hero. We have Enigma. So these tier lists that I make before a set releases are always the most speculative. They always contain the most kind of shots called, and they're always going to be the most wrong in a way because this is without any major events in the format and all kind of guesswork. So I always like to make the biggest shots called on these tier lists. So we're going to put Enigma in S tier. I think she does some really broken things. Ward is such a different mechanic. It comes with a different set of strengths and weaknesses compared to a traditional Phantasm or Spectra based illusionist like Prism or Dromai. Ward is very different because they can't be attacked. So you have a little more control. You have to be blocking, of course, to keep them alive. But if your opponent can't get through them all, they will just stick around and they can't actually attack them. So into some matchups, like Guardian, for example, where they can't deal more than like 10 to 15 damage a turn, you almost are guaranteed to win as Enigma because they'll never punch through your ward in any kind of substantial way. And if they do, you can just slow down for a second and then reset up a huge ward board. So she does some really fundamentally broken things, just like Illusionist always does, but just in a different way. But I just think she has some really insane cards. Manifestations of Mirror Guy is crazy. It's essentially a 2-card 12 if you have Tunic. With the Headpiece Traverse, it lets you tutor the Chi, so it's almost a 1-card 12 if you're using the Headpiece to find the Chi. It's really, really good. The deck can do some absurd things. I think the Mysteria heroes are all quite strong, and I think this is just another one. It's a 40 life illusionist, which is also something we don't have other than her right now, because Prism is what, a 32 life or something. Dromai just left. So I think if you're an illusionist player, I do think Prism's quite good as well, and I'll talk about that in a bit. But I think Enigma is going to be very, very powerful, and something that I've been looking at a lot right now because I've been enjoying her. I don't normally enjoy illusionists. I didn't enjoy Prism or Dromai, but I really enjoy playing Enigma, and yeah, I think she's going to be super strong. Next up, we have Phi. So Ninja, you would think had gotten support in this set, but it didn't really, because I think basically every Ninja card cares about Crouching Tigers. And if you're going to play a Crouching Tiger Ninja deck, you should just play the new hero Zen, because his hero ability and his Mystic cards all care about Crouching Tigers too. So there's not actually any support for the other ninjas, really, in the same way that Arachne didn't get support. I think Phi, for a while now, has been the worst ninja. Since Belittle is gone and Stubbies is gone, he just has, like, basically just bad rates compared to the other aggro decks. Like, if you're an aggro deck, I don't know why you wouldn't just play Azalea or some of the other aggro decks we'll get to. So he's kind of just bad. He just does really bad numbers. Next up, we have Kano. Kano, I think, is kind of a permanent A tier for me now. He might be more B tier, but every time I put him in B tier, he wins a Calling or a Battle Harden. So maybe I should just keep him in A tier. I do think he's getting a little weaker, or quite a bit weaker with this set, so I guess I'll put him in B tier for now, because he has a really hard matchup into Enigma. I do think the Waning Moon Kano can have a chance against Enigma, but as the Enigma in that matchup, if I bring Arcane Barrier 3, it feels pretty unlosable. Of course, you can lose games, but it's felt pretty insane when I have like Ward 10 and I can just pitch one of my 36 blues to Ward to AB3 every turn. So it feels almost like an auto win. Maybe Kano will find different tech for that. I'm sure they're looking for it or have found it already. But I think that's a pretty hard matchup. And I think he also maybe has a hard matchup into the Azaleas and the Dashes of the world. And so a lot of the decks I put up here, he has a hard matchup into. and a lot of the other decks I'm going to put up here, he has a hard matchup into. I think his best matchup for a long time was the Guardians, and I think they're quite bad right now. So I don't know if that really helps him out. The Warriors were also his best matchup, and I do think there's quite a few good Warriors. So if he hits the Warriors in an event, he'll be pretty happy. But I don't think you're likely to hit a lot of Guardian players unless they're coping, which there always will be. But that's kind of where I put him right now. I think Kasai is really strong. I think maybe she could be switched with Dorinthia. It's really hard to say which one is the better Valiant Dynamo warrior. I think Kasai does some more broken things because she gets two really, really good specializations with Blood on her hands and Raisin Army. So she does more, she's a higher ceiling. She can do more broken things than Dorinthia can. But I don't think she's quite as consistent. You have to generate the copper or generate the gold. Again, some decks it's not going to happen. Sometimes you just don't draw well. I've played games against Kasai where they never draw a blue in their first few hands. They just get unlucky. And so they have to pitch their yellows and then they can't fill up their graveyard to activate hero ability. It's just kind of can clunk a little more than Dorinthia. So while I do think it has a higher ceiling, I just think Dorinthia is far more consistent. And so I'm going to put her as the slightly worse Valiant Dynamo Warrior. But I think they're both great options. It's really, I guess, almost up to preference in which if you'd rather have that higher ceiling and do kind of more pop-off things, or if you just want that consistent mid-range game plan. Katsu, I'm going to put in B tier. He didn't get really anything either. Once again, Zen over here got all the cool stuff with Crouching Tigers, but he has been doing some pretty strong stuff for a while. Bonds lines are really good. Doing triple bonds is really good. That's not going anywhere. I just don't think he is the, if you're going to play an aggro deck, I don't think he's the one you should be on. I think Azalea and some of the other aggro decks we're going to get to are better options. And he's a great aggro deck, but he doesn't have a lot of good armor, and he doesn't hit the biggest numbers, especially he has a little bit of issues with consistency, because if you don't get that one really big bonds turn, you're kind of out of luck. And even after that big bonds turn, sometimes you have some trouble closing unless they're really low. But I think he's an okay aggro option. This probably comes as no surprise, but KO is going to come in as the next S tier deck. KO has been kind of the de facto best deck in the format for quite a while since the Pro Tour. He's the reason people brought Hatchet's Dorinthia, because she is favored into KO. He got an armory deck that gave him some pretty solid buffs. The new blue Run Roughshod is pretty broken. The new chess piece is really good, Savage Sash. Those both add quite a few points in win rate percentage to a deck that's already was considered S tier. So I don't think he's leaving S tier anytime soon. He's kind of speed running Living Legend. I think he's already past halfway. I think he might be over 500. I know they just made an announcement fairly recently decreasing how many Living Legend points are getting distributed, because I think he was hitting Living Legend faster than they wanted. So that tells you how good he is, that they have to change the number of Living Legends points getting given out. But yeah, he's quite good. I think he is probably the other aggro option with Azalea. I think if you want to play aggro, you should basically play Azalea or KO. They're both really good. KO is a little more mid-rangey. He does block better than Azalea for sure. He also has a much better armor suite than Azalea, and he has maybe, this is arguable, but maybe better pop-off turns because of Savage Sash and Blood Rush Bellows. So you have this nice defensive capability. You can pop off a little bit, but he doesn't have quite the turn-to-turn damage. I mean, you can do some pretty good damage per turn. You've got big attacks. But if you watch Azalea's turn-to-turn damage, it's just like 15, 15, 15, 15 or more every turn. And with Disruption, he's also a little low on Disruption. He's got some good Disruption. 3 Command and Conquer, 3 Send Packing, and then often 3 Humble. But basically every single Azalea card has Disruption and some pretty severe Disruption too. So, yeah, it's really whichever one you like, but I think these are probably the two premier aggro options in the format. and they're going to. Everyone has to kind of react to them, right? That's how aggro works. You have to react to the aggro deck, unless you're another aggro deck, and then you just try to kill each other. But you always have to kind of be reacting to the aggro deck. So these two will shape the format a lot. Next up, we have Levia. Now, Levia is interesting. She's getting one of the best expansion cards. She was already quite good. I think I would already put her in A tier. And she got Savage Sash, which could be good in her. So I had her in A tier, I think, already. What I'm really wondering is, does she deserve to be in S tier? I won't put her in S tier yet, but maybe when we come to a tier list video a month from now or 2 months from now, she will be in S tier. I'm just not ready to put her in S tier yet. I think we really need to see how much Savage Sash and the new expansion card buff her. But I do think she's a pretty powerful brute, and I do think she can do some more broken things than KO can do if she runs hot. I just don't think she's as consistent, which has always kind of been Levia's issue, right? If she can't fill up her graveyard, if she doesn't draw the right hands to fill it up, if she can't turn off her blood debt, she has some consistency issues. Obviously, really good Levia players are able to abate a lot of that, and the deck can seem pretty consistent. But a lot of those Levia players are putting a lot of practice and work into making her seem that consistent. And it's not as easy as KO, where you just resolve, here's my wild ride into my swing big, or into my claw into my swing big, and you don't really have to work for it. So he's the more consistent brute. I'll keep him in S tier. I'll put her in like high A tier. Next up, we have Max. Max also got an expansion card with, I believe it's called Supercell. But he's a horrible deck, and I don't think he gets any better, so we'll just drop him in D tier. New is next as the newest hero from Mysteria. She is a Mystic Assassin. I think she is the first assassin I will call truly good. I think Azuri was good and is good, but I would never say Azuri was like great. I think New is great. I think New is A tier. I think she is. I think she's the best disruptive deck in the format that's not Azalea. Because Azalea is almost more of an aggro deck. Of course, she is disrupting with like every card, so she's certainly a disruptive deck. But New isn't an aggro deck. New is kind of our first true mill deck. She does a really good job of milling the opponent. Her cards all banish from the top, and she has a headpiece that vanishes from hand. She's just constantly taking cards from the top of your deck and from your hand, and making it so your turns are weaker and your deck thins. And she's not often going to win with damage. She, of course, can win with damage. The deck isn't like weak, it does damage numbers. But I think she can also just as easily win by running you out of deck, or running you out of relevant threats at least. So the deck's really good. It's consistent. The headpiece is one of the best armor pieces we've ever seen, I think. It's essentially Coronet Peak, but they can't pitch for it, and it's a reaction, so it essentially has Go Again, and it always will banish it from hands. So since it's not being pitched, it doesn't go back to deck. And it counts as a reaction for her cards. So her headpiece is just really insane. So yeah, I think I'll put her in A tier. She has some struggles into the setup decks, which disruptive decks always will. She's going to struggle into Enigma, into Pistol Dash probably, and she has a little of trouble into decks that block really well, so the Warriors are a bit of an issue for her. But the aggro decks, I think she'll have a pretty good matchup into, and I think with enough work, you can maybe find a way to mill out the decks that you have bad matchups into. So I'll give her a optimistic A tier placement. Speaking of optimistic placements, we are going to throw Olympia in A tier. Now this one is probably the biggest change, because I think I would have easily put him in D tier before this set. He certainly has the most influential expansion slot card for his hero. It just completely changes his play style. It goes from a deck that is just a warrior that doesn't do anything better than the other warriors, to a warrior that can gain like 20 plus armor health in the game, and attacks the game on a bit of a different axis. Um, I still haven't figured out the best Olympia deck. Me and my team have messed around with both the Decimator deck, which cares more about Vigor and buffing Decimator, which I think is quite good. And I also think the Hatchets deck is quite good as well. I don't know which one's better. I think they're both pretty good. And I think his new expansion slot card is almost always 8 value from one card and is a payoff for the gold you're going to be generating. So I think that's quite good. I don't think he's as good as Dorintheus still, but I do think he has. I think he has the strongest card that a warrior can resolve at the moment, consistently. Because like Kazai, maybe Blood on her hands or Raise an Army is stronger, but it's a little harder for her to get gold. She has to build up her graveyard and hit, whereas he just has to like win any wager, and his headpiece does it easily for him. So he has like a pretty insane 8 value card, kind of like a codex level value with the new expansion card. So maybe he'll end up more B tier or even C tier, but I'm going to be a little optimistic with this early speculative tier list and put him in A. Next up, we have Prism. Illusionist is basically always good. I don't think Prism is any different. 32 life makes her a little easier to kill than Enigma. Phantasm also means she has a bit of different matchups, and Spectra as well. So she has kind of a different matchup spread, but she does still do the fundamental powerful illusionist thing of setting up a powerful board, breaking the game on some axes, and yeah, illusionists are just good. So I think she's good. I don't think she's quite as good as Enigma. That's also one of the matchups I haven't had the chance to test yet with Enigma. I've mostly been playing into the other S tier decks, so I've tested her into like KO and Azalea and some of the other Mysteria heroes, but I haven't gotten to play into Prism, so I have no idea if that is Prism or Enigma favored. I would guess Prism favored because Enigma does not play many poppers, but I could not tell you actually because I've never played it. But I think Prism is still quite good, and Illusionist will continue to be good. Next up is Rhinar. Brute's pretty good right now, but I think Rhinar just does almost everything worse than the other Brutes. He Intimidate is really good, really powerful. He got quite a lot of good stuff in heavy hitters. I think he's a good deck. I just don't really see a reason to play him over KO and Levia. In the same vein that I don't think there's a reason to play Bravo over Victor. I don't think these decks are like that much are like garbage. I mean, maybe Bravo's kind of garbage right now, but it's just really, I don't see a reason to play this deck, and he's kind of in the C tier of like, why would you pick up Rhinar when you could pick up KO or Levia? He's okay. He's kind of just fine. Next up is Riptide. Riptide got some new tools in this set as well. He got a pretty solid new specialization card, and Riptide has been putting up some results, kinda. I mean, we've seen him at smaller events doing pretty well. I don't think he's done well at any major events yet, but he's definitely picked up some ProQuest wins. I think did okay at like Age Opens or Battle Hardens or something like that. I'll put him in B tier. I was trying to decide between B and C. Ranger has good cards. Like I said, he can do something kind of similar to Azalea. He also has some different broken cards with the traps. Some of the traps are really, really good. If you're playing KO and you come in with Bear Fangs and you want to arsenal your, I don't know, your swing big, and then they inertia trap you, it's a lot of value for the Riptide, and it's hard to play around all of his traps, especially the really strong ones with Buzzsaw and Collapsing. So he does some different broken things than Azalea. I certainly don't think he's better than Azalea, but he's quite good. And we'll see where he goes from here. I think he's got some interesting matchups. I think he actually might have game into all of the S tier decks. Maybe. Maybe not Enigma. The pings can be annoying, but you can also just never let them ping you as Enigma. You can just play the auras without counters and without go again. Like you can play 10,000 Year Reunion, just attack for ward 10 every turn, and they often can't deal enough damage to get through and kill that, so you just attack for ward 10 every single turn until they die, which is hard for the Riptide to deal with. So Maybe not all of the S tier decks, but he's in a decent spot. Now Teklovasun finally got his Arcane Barrier equipment. Does that make his Arcane matchups, particularly Kano, better? Probably not. Does it make his boost version better? Because they're like 0 cost blue boost cards that are instants, I think. Maybe. They could be good for that. So I'm just going to put him in C tier. I would have probably put him in D tier without the expansion cards, but I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. He was putting up a few ProQuest wins because maybe he can beat the Warriors and the Guardians and maybe the Brutes, and he got some new stuff. So I'll give him the benefit of the doubt and put him in C tier. Now Azuri actually did get buffs compared to basically everyone else we've talked about. New Illusionist came out, didn't really give anything major to Prism. New Ninjas came out, didn't really give anything new to Katsu or Phi. New Assassin came out, didn't really give anything to Arachne, but did, I think, buff Azuri quite a bit because Azuri also cares about stealth, and there's some really good stealth cards in the set. Bonds of Agony, Persuasive, whatever it's called, both of the blue stealths, Justinic. I mean, there's quite a lot of things that care about stealth that Azuri could use, and I think Azuri was already pretty good. I'm going to put her in B tier because I don't think she's quite as good as New. I think if you wanted to play Disruptive Assassin, I would recommend New over Azuri, but I do think she does still do some pretty strong disruptive things, and I do think she got some buffs in the set. I maybe would have put her in C tier otherwise, but I think some of the new buffs give her a little bit of hope. Now, Victor. Victor is interesting, right? I kind of want to talk about Victor a bit because I made a lot of videos on Victor. He was the hero I was playing the most before ProQuest. I ended up playing KO a lot during ProQuest. Victor is like, I guess what I would have called my main because I play Guardian a lot. And he got a new, pretty powerful new expansion card. So he would seem to be in a good spot. I think he got the second most ProQuest wins. But, I think he's unfavored into all 3 of the new Mysteria heroes. Maybe. And I think his matchup into KO got worse. And I don't think his Warrior matchup is as good as it was. So if we're looking at the top decks here, I think he beats Azalea. And then I think he maybe beats Dorinthia. But then I think he loses to these 2. So maybe you beat half of the S tiers. He loses to Pistol Dash. I think you beat a bad Kasai, but you lose to a Kasai that knows how to properly set up a raised army. I think you maybe lose to a anti-fatigue Levia that can set up some loops. I think you lose to New. I think maybe you beat Olympia, and I think you lose to Prism. That's not a lot of things you beat here, and I think Guardian doesn't really do, once again, anything crazy. Like, Victor does the most crazy things. You have some 0 for 7s and 0 for 8s with Test of Strength and Trounce. You have like kind of 2-card 10s sometimes with Golden Sun. So you have some of the best rates or some of the better rates, but your rates are still kind of worse than just KO or like Warrior, even with all of that. I'm going to put him. This is me being really optimistic and putting him in A tier. I think realistically he deserves B tier, but I think people are still going to show up with him a lot. I want to like go with my head and put him in B tier, but my heart says A tier. So we will put him in A tier just because he got the new expansion card and because I want to hold on to hope. We've got the Rune Blades, which I guess have close names. I think they both start with V's. Viserai. Viserai got nothing. His deck wasn't great. He had an OTK deck. He's not good. We'll put him in C tier. Vincent. Vincent is interesting, though, because she got quite a good new expansion slot card, and she has a pretty favored matchup into Enigma because of how her hero ability interacts with Ward. So I think I think she could be in an interesting spot. I will put her in B tier. That's where she probably deserves to go. She can be aggressive enough. She got a pretty good new card. A lot of people aren't ready for Runeblade because they're not very common right now. So I don't think she's the aggro deck I would tell people to be on, but I don't think she's a bad aggro deck. And she has some good matchups, like I said, into Enigma, for example. Last, we've got the new Mystic Ninja Zen with his Crouching Tiger lines. I think Zen is... Okay, let's see. I think Zen is better than Katsu. So if I put Katsu in B tier, he's higher than Katsu, so he's at least higher B tier, or he's A tier. I will put him in A tier. I think he can do some really, really strong things because of how Artivore interacts with Crouching Tigers. If you can easily make some Crouching Tigers, which he can, Artivore isn't really banishing a card from your hand. So you're basically just drawing 2 off of it, which is really insane. He also goes really wide. So he's almost certainly, he's certainly the best Artivore deck in the game. When you double Transcend, you also get 2 resources from your chess piece. So then you can like Artivore twice for free. And you get 2 Crouching Tigers or something like that, at least 1 from your hero ability. So he can do some like really insane turns. He probably has, looking at all the other heroes, I think he has the highest high roll aggro deck turns in the game. Maybe Katsu or Dash.io could sometimes show him up, but I think he generally is going to have the highest damage aggro deck turns in the game right now because of how powerful some of his Crouching Tiger lines can go and how good Artivore is in his deck. So I'm going to put him in, once again, a bit optimistic for the new heroes, but I do think they're all quite good. I think they pushed the MST heroes quite a bit. They're the first talented heroes we've had in a while, and historically, talented heroes are quite good. I think... Is every Living Legend hero talented? Chain, Prism, Starvo, Briar, Icelander, Oldham, Lexi, Dromai, right? Every single hero in Living Legend is talented. I'm probably forgetting the one hero that's not talented. Probably. Yeah, I'm probably missing like one hero that's not talented. But I think every single Living Legend hero is talented, which really proves how good the heroes with talents are. And kind of reiterates the point that maybe we should take a deeper look at these Mysterio heroes because they are talented. Yeah, I'm pretty sure all the Living Legend heroes have a talent because they are all with this new Mystic talent, which means they're probably going to be quite good. So I'm just going to go with what history has told us, that most heroes with a talent are generally quite good. Even if you look down here in the lower tiers, the only talented hero is Fi. I think all of these don't have a talent. And then even in B tier, you start to see more talents. We've got Shadow, we've got Light. But even then, I mean, there's only 1, 2, 3 talented heroes, I think, in these bottom 3 tiers. And then we've got like talented hero, talented hero, talented hero, talented hero, talented hero. So like equal as many, and yeah. Anyways, I think the talented heroes are gonna be quite good. This video is quite long at this point. I usually try to do 20-minute videos. This one's like gonna be 45 minutes because there are so many heroes right now. But I hope this gives you a good idea of the metagame, excuse me, of what to play. If I was gonna recommend a hero to pick up, I would probably say one of these ones up here. I think if you want a mid-range deck, you should go for Hatchet Story. If you want an aggro deck, you can pick Azalea, or if you want a little more blocking potential and a little less damage, you could go with KO. And if you want a more defensive setup a board state deck, you can go with Enigma. Of course, you can do well on any deck in Flesh and Blood because it really rewards specialists, but these are what I would say are the best decks going into what's coming up next, Nationals. Yeah, thanks so much for watching. Please leave comments, especially with these speculative tier lists. I would love to hear what you guys think. Remember to like, subscribe, and I'll see you next time.